And I'm going to share. Okay. Awesome. So we're live. Everyone will start the sharing. Always slow on the phones. There we go. Okay. Oops. Okay. 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 So we are live. Amazing folks. Hi, John. Thanks for joining. I'm about to kick off. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Accelerator Insider. We explore the minds behind accelerators, incubators, and venture studios, interviewing innovation leaders to learn how they're building businesses for today and for the future. I'm really excited to welcome Dom. I won't say my name. I won't say Dominique. Dom Einhorn, who is the founder and CEO of Uniqorn. So hi, Dom. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Dom or Dominique?
Yes, you can call me Dominique for ease of use for today. I feel like it's like the brother from another mother, yeah, with the Dom. I think, as I said earlier, if someone Googles you, they can see tons of information about you and your background, listen to tons of great podcasts and interviews. So I want to really jump into some more meaty stuff with you because they can get that information online. I think the biggest thing to start with is that, you started this in 2018. You are French. You moved back to France with a focus on building the world's largest rural incubator accelerator called Uniqorn. Just break it down for me. So why France? Why rural? And then why the world's largest? And how does that come about?
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, I was born and raised in France, so I'm at least half French. The other half is of German heritage. Spent most of my career, 25 years in the US on the West Coast, in Los Angeles, and had the itch for many, many years to come back to Europe, not France in particular. I was born and raised in a small town of 400 souls that has grown over the last 53 years to 650 souls. So not very big, still not very big to most standards. And when I grew up, because I'm old enough to say so, there was no internet connection. And when I came of adult age, there started to be internet. I'm not talking 1993, where we had dial-up internet. Very quickly, because I wanted to launch my first startup in France in 1993, I realized it was next to impossible. There was no such thing as free local calling. When I heard about the US having free local calling, I said, I'm there. I no longer have to pay by the minute, outrageous fees by the minute. I can actually be online 24/7 for a flat monthly fee, unheard of in France. Obviously, a lot of those friction points, most of the audience will probably not be familiar with it. I think one of the things that we've kind of taken for granted today is the fact that we can be connected with anyone in the world for free, 24/7. For those of us who are old enough, we remember the outrageous long distance calls and how much they used to cost, right? From $3 to $2 to $1 to 99 cents per minute to 9.9 cents per minute to 4.9 cents a minute, eventually free. So everything is trending towards free. I think that's a trend that's still with us today. I think most importantly, what I wanted to demonstrate is that in this day and age, and in particular in 2018, why do you need to be, even less so in 2023, in a large metropolitan area to launch a digital startup or an ecosystem that houses /incubates /accelerates digital startups as long as you have access to fiber.
Mm-hmm.
So France or not France, I have many friends in Africa that have thriving digital startups that still have many of the friction points that we've long, put behind us in terms of connectivity. The power goes out. I'm working with a great digital studio in Bangladesh currently. They have multiple power outages every single day, yet they produce better UI UX than anything I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. So that is kind of like fascinating to me. Like, how can you empower large swaths of people, regardless of background, regardless of location, and most importantly, because it did grow up in a small town, why not launch a multi-billion-dollar startup potentially in a village of 150 people, no matter where it's located, whether it's in France, in Africa, Latin America, heck, on the moon.
This is interesting in general because, it hits across a couple different, I think, narratives, and you're a marketing guy, so a little bit of some narratives around where the best talent is, how to build something, the right way to do something, right? You have a very international perspective. You work with folks from all walks and talks from all over the globe, really looking for like the best opportunity. And also building in an environment that is really different from the Silicon Valleys and the New Yorks, right? And things like that. And so, was the rural, was there like a specific intention about creating some kind of use case or proof point around doing it in a rural location versus doing it in an urban location?
Oh, most definitely. I think that, obviously for those of you who have raised money before, if you tell even people in 2023 today that you are a group of young founders, 20, 22, 23 years old, because I just got off the phone with a couple of them earlier, and you're located in Miami, they're in Miami. They've raised $3.6 million over the last 2 years. No issues whatsoever with their startup. But you take the exact same founders and they say they're from Duluth, Iowa, it's going to be a different story. There's definitely going to be on the investor side, why there? Why not in Silicon Valley? Why not in New York City? Why not in Los Angeles, Silicon Beach, or in another, what they, branded thriving ecosystem? And we see more and more startups. I think the first real big one that shocked people was Skype out of Scandinavia, out of Sweden. That obviously was purchased by Microsoft at a multi-billion-dollar valuation, but people were shocked. Oh, couldn't even relate to the fact that could have been started outside of the US. So it was more of a challenge, and like a call to action more than anything, like to demonstrate that yes, it can be done. Yes, it's not going to be easy, but given the right set of tools, there's no reason why you couldn't have great founders anywhere. So the idea was to definitely democratize the startup process. And primarily today, again, we work on a global basis. So we interact with founders from all walks of life. Most of them, the vast majority of them, are in remote locations, remote being defined as outside the US.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense more broadly. I was just looking the other day at like the top venture cities in the US, and really it's just like San Francisco, Palo Alto, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, and then the rest become global cities, and you end up with the Miamis and Austins and other things like that. But when you kind of see that, and then you also get stats that say, most investors want to invest within like a 60-mile radius of wherever the ecosystem is, you create this kind of by default, well, maybe not by default, on purpose, kind of elitist narrative that says, if you're not here doing this thing with these people, good luck. But we don't really support it, right?
And I think one major drawback of that attitude and strategy is that you're not solving the world's problems, right? The problems that you encounter, I'm not saying there are not problems in San Francisco, but Lagos, Nigeria probably has more tangible problems that deserve to be solved than San Francisco. And what you're seeing as a result as well is that you have a lot of luxury type of products and services being developed that don't cater to a true blue human need anymore, right? Such as access to finance, digital banking, I mean, with large swaths of the population around the world that don't have a bank account, most people in the US have a hard time relating to that. So the entrepreneur in the US, yes, there are some, fortunately, but would probably not be focused on that. It would be probably, come to market with a product that is much more focused on what he deems to be a need. And sometimes we have to ask ourselves the question, is it really a need, a human need, or is it a luxury? Do we need another social media app to share our photos, right? When you look at parts of Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, they don't have access to even, the biggest commodities that we've taken for granted in more mature markets.
Do you think that, so maybe first, so have you always had like an international perspective and international bent when it comes to investing and finding opportunities? Because what I find is that the US is very good and focused at creating very specific and kind of guarded narratives. So right now we're seeing a lot of investment in Nigeria, and it's like it's very specific. It's like they're not really doing Kenya, right? They're not really, like, some of the big guys are, but most folks aren't. Do you feel like in less of mature, maybe venture ecosystems or investment ecosystems or just global ones, that it's actually easier to do better deals and get better deal flow, more opportunity because it's not under that kind of constraint?
I mean, yes. I mean, for one, if you look at the delta in terms of valuations, I'm talking now pre-seed, seed, Series A, between a US deal across the board and a European deal, there is already a major delta in terms of valuation. Typically, what we're seeing at pre-seed is 3-to-1 for a deal that's equally structured, has great founders, has some initial traction in terms of user traction. They're onboarding users. Yes, there may still be pre-revenue, but they already have a community or they're in the process of building a community. If you compare apples to apples, at the very minimum, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, sometimes as high as 5-to-1, with no logical explanation as to why that is. Now, if you go further and you compare some of these deals and you take a US deal compared to a Kenyan, Nigerian, Ugandan deal, the delta in terms of valuation is sometimes 10, 20, 30-to-1. Now, there obviously are more and more, unfortunately so, investment dollars flowing into those markets. Like if you go back 10 years ago, to see a deal in Nigeria getting funded, it was almost unheard of. Now we're seeing more and more, but still the ratio of deals getting funded in the US versus those emerging markets is still, largely skewed towards the US and some other markets, mature markets, rather than emerging economies.
And I mean, I always think that the US, I always say, is like, is the consumer of the world. And the challenge is that, like, Americans can't shoulder the burden of being that consumer anymore with the debt ratios and so on. Like, we just can't burden the consumption, right? And so
yeah, I think we just topped 33 billion yesterday, if my Bloomberg headline was right this morning.
Yeah. So you look and say, well, how do you disperse the consumption for equity and also management, right, of a global economy?
And is it sustainable?
Yeah, which we already kind of know that question.
Yeah, we know the answer to that.
Which goes back to what you said earlier, which was around like the idea that everything's going closer to free. So how do we deal with that? Like, everything's going closer to free at least for the consumer or the citizen. I always try to be like the people first versus the business term of that, for the citizen and the individual. How do businesses really fight against the fact that more and more stuff becomes efficient and commoditized, and then eventually becomes free? It moves from a private sector to a public sector good. How do you think about that? How do you think about how that affects markets in terms of opportunities?
Yeah, so I'm not an economist, unfortunately. So otherwise, whatever I would predict would not come true tomorrow. Right? That's what you all have in common. I don't have a crystal ball either. Yeah. However, what we do probably agree on is that everything is trending towards zero in terms of cost. The beauty about it, let's look at the positives, is the fact that a lot of the products that used to cost an arm and a leg, and a lot of the services, are being largely demonetized and democratized. and those two trends run in parallel, right? We earlier mentioned long distance calls. Well, if you're today under the age of 35, we're like, what's the long distance call? Well, a long distance call is one that you used to pay for an arm and a leg per minute to make a phone call. Today, free. If you look at bandwidth, I came across a very old box when I moved not too long ago that had an old bill from a company called Alphared in Houston, Texas. I'm not sure if they still exist, but it was my old bandwidth bill from 1998, and it was outrageous. I was paying $8,000 a month for bandwidth, and I did a quick calculation, napkin calculation. I think the same cost today would be $2 or $3 a month. Oh. So that's how much bandwidth costs have dropped dramatically. Obviously, it's not even mentioned computing power, right? Moore's law, since I believe 1976, where the performance of computing doubles every 18 months and halves in price, and we're still on track today to see that. Now, the challenges that brings along as well is that how do you make money in a world where everything is quickly becoming free? And what we're seeing now is the pace accelerating dramatically as a result of AI.
Right.
So pillars of the economy that are generating GDP, and if we continue to calculate GDP according to the same measures, it will be quickly becoming impossible to calculate GDP because we're not growing anymore, right? So if you, in the past, let's say you're a content production company and you used to have 10, 30, 50 journalists that used to pay. You may still have now 5 or 6 content curators that use a number of AI tools, GPT-4 being maybe one of them. There are some higher performing ones that produce pretty good content that still needs human oversight today and maybe not tomorrow. How do you deal with that? All right. If you're a journalist today and 2 years ago you thought you could outperform GPT-3, and then you came about 3.5, version 3.5, and like, well, this looks pretty damn good. And then you have 4, and it makes less, at least on the grammar side, less mistakes than you do when you write. Right. You're scratching your head, right? And the next version, we don't even know what to expect. I mean, I saw the new version of DALL-E coming along, I think 2 or 3 days ago, where you enter a prompt of anything your mind could possibly imagine. I had a dream last night. I was cycling on top of the moon. Can you give me a picture of it? And all of a sudden, hey, it's Dom with a bicycle on top of the moon. Oh my God, it's exactly my dream, right? That's what we're dealing with right now. So the pace is accelerating. More and more democratization of the tools that we have. They're all trending faster and faster towards net zero. So you have to be more creative. You have to create value. You have to you have to learn to adapt, number one, and you have to learn to leverage those tools, ideally for the good, right? Because obviously, as we know, there's a double-edged sword with any technology, right? A gun can save a person, gun can kill a person. Most technology tools can either save lives or kill. So I think we just have to be cognizant of what's already here, and even more cognizant of what's about to come. And adaptability is going to play a larger and larger role in our capacity to cope with the rate of change.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all feel very much, this kind of the idea of the singularity, even though it's very far away, literally, but there's a lot of this, the philosophical, is merging with our reality more presently, and we're kind of more aware of we're making these decisions that they're not just kind of happenstance. They're not happening kind of without our knowledge. We're really trying to become more present of oh wait, there's a real implication for the decision that I make and how I participate in this world that's evolving rapidly, and it's forcing me as a person to evolve physically, spiritually, emotionally, whatever, to match that rate of change, which is a really great thing for humans, but also very painful thing as well.
Without a doubt. So I think The book you're probably referencing is Ray Kurzweil, The Singularity is Near, which I think was published in 2005, if my memory serves me right. And in that book, obviously, he talked about human biology merging with technology, and the perfect merger between the two, obviously, forming the singularity. His initial best guess, and he's a good guesser, he's got an amazing track record when it comes to making those kind of educated guesses, was that the singularity would be with us in 2033, roughly speaking. And one of the last talks I saw from him on the topic, I think it's actually gonna be faster than that. I think he's actually revised his own schedule, which everybody told, it's way too aggressive and this thing will never happen. Whatever you're calling a singularity will never happen. But the convergence of these breakthrough technologies, we're talking robotics, AI, ubiquitous bandwidth, they're all converging and becoming one mega trend, one mega technology that all of us, again, being democratized. If you go back to the 80s, the 90s, in the 2000s, in order to have access to the best technology, it cost you an arm and a leg. Today, you can be a kid in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and you have access to more technology than Bill Clinton had when he was president of the United States, for free.
Right. The world has changed fundamentally, right? The fundamental shift. We're not even talking in the same terms we were talking before. I think sometimes we forget that like our literal language around things has shifted. And so our reality has also shifted in part. And so we kind of think we're still in the 90s. We think we're in the 2000s, but we're really, we're in a different moment. And we're kind of coming to terms with that real time. And you have, I saw your background and you've done a lot of work in marketing, and I definitely want to get some of the work that you've been also doing currently. So I'm assuming that gives you a particular lens in how you think about narrative, how you think about story, how you think about how the future is being crafted. And I'd love to kind of know, for you, how have you used that lens to kind of perceive or kind of identify opportunities? Because you're really able to kind of cut through the noise because you have that ability to understand the layers of narrative. How has that impacted kind of how you see the world, or how you look for new deals, how you build things for yourself?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that obviously we all built upon our experiences, good or bad, right? And we all have good and bad experiences. We all live them every single day. And as a result of those experiences, we shape a reality that can be a thwarted reality, or that can actually be a reflection of what's really going on, right? If you're an entrepreneur, your objective is to solve problems, is to create products and services that solve a problem that you believe is prevalent in parts of the world or in the entire world. The older you get as an entrepreneur as well, or as an investor, you become more and more concerned, maybe because it's our biology, our clock that's ticking, about the legacy that you want to leave behind and the imprint that you want to leave behind once you're no longer here. Because I think we all want to be immortal, whether we agree with that or not, whether we're transhumanists or not. Nothing against transhumanists. I'm probably half one, right? I don't necessarily want my biology to be around and get decrepit over the next 200 or 300 years, but I'd certainly like to have something left that people can touch, interact with, and say, wow, this was created by Dom, right? That would be pretty cool, right? I think a lot of people are like me when it comes to that, right? Not much, but wow, every once in a while you come across a little trinket and say, wow, this was built by Dom. It's pretty cool. So being motivated by a number of things, one of the first things that motivated me, and it goes back to a story that always stuck with me when I first went to the United States from France. Again, growing up in rural France, I moved to the US at age 23. I'm with a friend who was my strength coach at that point in time in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I take out the trash. First thing that shocked me is like, oh my God, the size of the trash can is like 4 times the size of what we have in France. What is people throwing away? And it's full. So I open up the trash, I throw our trash in the trash can and say, well, there's a Barbie doll in there. What's wrong with it? So I pull it out. I can't find anything wrong. I push a button on the back. It starts talking to me. I'm like, why do people throw this away? It's perfectly working. If they don't like it, they could give it to another kid, or maybe like put it into a nonprofit organization that replaces it. So there's this waste really stuck with me. The size of the trash can, and now I understand why the trash can is so big, because people throw things away that clearly shouldn't be thrown away, right? Obviously, notion of recycling, et cetera, et cetera. So that waste, that idea of waste stuck with me for a long, long time, right? Which also made me very interested in, obviously, environmental projects and what you can do to reduce overconsumption. I mean, I know we're living in a consumer society. I have a lot of trinkets myself, many of which I probably shouldn't have, but sometimes it's overdone, right? And then you have the haves and the have-nots. Now, I grew up as somewhat of a have-not, and I always was shocked by what some other people had, even more so when we went to the US, right? Okay, not only do they drive cars, man, they drive Hummers. Why? One person in a Hummer doesn't even have a family. Why? What does he need? What is he carrying around? He probably has a big business and he's got some stuff to lug around. No, there's nothing. The car is empty, right? And it does 8 miles per gallon with the H1 at that point in time. So I think a lot of those stories, because when you're a storyteller and you're a marketer, you have to be a storyteller. But those stories are ingrained in our subconscious mind, and we carry those along. They shape who we are, they shape our persona. And as a result of shaping our persona, they also shape our perception of the world. And the way we basically look outward as entrepreneurs or investors is that becomes an expression of who we are. And the products or services that we do develop are that expression. So at age 53 today, I'm no longer the kid I was when I was 23. Clearly, none of us are. So I have a different lens. I mean, this lens is not as sharp anymore. Hopefully the other lens is a little sharper than it was when I was 23. And I'm looking at the world right now, and I see problems, maybe not as crass as they used to be, but still a lot of them, such as access to healthcare, access to education, access to energy, because I work with people who are great entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs, and every once in a while I'm on with them on a conversation like this one, and it was black because they had a power outage. And I already know now, initially it was shocking, right? Did I say something you didn't like? I know it was a power outage, right? So there are still a lot of problems that we need to solve as entrepreneurs. And one thing I don't like is that in developed economies, we're again focusing on a lot of luxury types of product services and somewhat ignoring the fact that there are still people in need, and there are still a very, very large opportunity to have a net positive impact on people's lives, on animals' lives, on the environment that serves us all. Education, obviously, is one of the first things that comes to mind, right? We're not just gonna overnight plug in our brains, connect them to the cloud, and have access to human knowledge. I mean, obviously, that's underway, right? That will happen, and the rate of adoption of any new technology, if you look at how long it took to adopt a cell phone, right? We all remember the old cell phones. It's actually a perfect analogy when it comes to democratization and trending towards free. The cell phone that Gordon Gekko had in the movie Wall Street, he was carrying it around in a briefcase. His calls would drop all the time. It was very heavy, looked like a brick, and he had to be a billionaire to afford it. And it never worked. Then the calls became cheaper, the phones became smaller, no more briefcase, right? Now you have earbuds on, and you can talk for free as long as you want all day long, and everybody has them, and the calls never drop, and it's free. So that's kind of the logical progression of any technology, right? If we're looking at the rate of adoption of social media, even faster. That pace keeps accelerating. Every time there is a new breakthrough technology, if you look at ChatGPT, I think it took 2 months to have 100 million users on ChatGPT, just by word of mouth. They didn't spend a single dime on advertising.
Right.
It was a breakthrough technology, still is, obviously. And all of a sudden, everybody jumped on and feeding the machine and making that machine smarter. And hopefully that machine will help us resolve a lot of problems that we still have today.
Right. No, I mean, it's a great point. I mean, I touch you for hours about this, but I think I think you bring up a ton of really good points, which I think actually may be a good segue into Uniqorn and kind of how you're approaching it. You have a couple things going on. So I'd love to kind of just get like the brass tacks of like what it is, how it works. You have it labeled as an incubator accelerator, like what that actually kind of means. And then just to throw that in here, you also have this like, affiliate directory. So I wanted to kind of see like maybe you could just talk us through high level, like who should participate in this? Why would they want to? What do you guys offer? The whole thing.
Yeah, again, going back to solving problems, right? That's kind of like the core motto behind all of the initiatives that we have. The incubator accelerator, I think they go hand in hand. I mean, obviously, a lot of people segregate the two. In our case, because we're so hands-on, we're not just investing, right? We're very much involved, specifically on the marketing side and the customer acquisition side. If an idea gets incubated, and most people probably understand what an incubator is. For those that don't, think about the hospital incubators. The baby is born, maybe still too weak, needs to be put into an incubator so it can survive. We still do quite a bit of that, right? To make sure that an idea that has potential, that has traction, can survive and graduate to the next level. If it does, it goes into the accelerator. Usually the accelerator, what we identify are startups that have a core need for customer acquisition. That's what we specialize in. That's what we've been doing for almost 30 years. So anything from SEO, search engine optimization, to ASO, app store optimization, if they're primarily a mobile play, to PR, IR, public relations, investor relations, paid media, with the idea being acquire a new customer at the lowest cost possible, right? So that's a lot of experience, a lot of connections that come into play that we put at the disposal of the startups that we work with. We also have our own projects that we incubate and accelerate. And that's kind of like us wearing a lot of hats, because initially we were startup entrepreneurs. Then over the years we became investors. But you always have that itch, right? And you always also ask yourself, I guess I know a lot of athletes, and they have that same itch. Can I still do it? Right? I'm 40 years old. Could I still play a game, whether it's football, rugby, whatever it is, the Rugby World Cup going on right now? Entrepreneurs were the same way, right? So if you had an early exit like I did when I was 29, 30 years old, can I still do it at 53? Well, actually, if I look at the data seems to indicate that I have much higher chance of actually succeeding in my 50s than I did back in my 20s. But if you look at the headlines, you'd think it's impossible, right? You need to be 23 in order to be a successful digital entrepreneur. That's if you believe the headlines, the clickbait headlines. Right? The facts are completely different. People with the highest success rate, people with obviously experience, with the knowledge, with the network, with the connections. People have failed many, many times, right? Because unless you actually tasted failure, if you taste it for the first time, you may give up. But if you've failed as many times as I have, and other people in my situation, you're like, just, get back up the next day and, move on to something else or adjust or pivot, right?
Well, you did talk a little bit, I've heard about in some of the other podcasts about the need and also your personal kind of ability to manage risk and just resiliency. And I think I saw you talking about this idea of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing.
Yeah, interesting.
Is that one of your techniques to like?
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure it's a technique. It's something I stumbled upon. So the little town of 400 souls I mentioned, and where I grew up in, is right next. It's like 1 kilometer or so, 3/4 of a mile from the largest forest in France. So I always used to go fishing. It was a river that runs through the forest as a kid, probably 3-4 times a week. And then I moved to the US and kind of like lost touch with that and moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, initially, as I mentioned. And there's not a single tree there, aside from some palm trees that look pretty, right? So I always missed the forest. I always loved trees. And lo and behold, if you look at one of the primary ways of how Japanese people work on reducing blood pressure, hypertension, is via what they call forest bathing. Japanese term is Shinrin-yoku for that.
Mhm.
I've always, without knowing the science behind it, it is science. It's demonstrated as highly successful against a number of ailments in the Japanese culture. But I knew nothing about it as a kid. I just knew that I felt a lot better in the forest fishing than sitting on my couch, right? So I came back to my roots, and I studied Shinrin-yoku, read a couple of books about it, and like, wow, it was mind-boggling, right? I read all these scientific case studies of people suffering from depression, from hypertension, all sorts of ailments, and they were able to get cured just by spending a half an hour to an hour in the forest and sometimes touching trees. The specialists will advise against hugging trees because yes, there can be some bugs that can come onto you and whatnot. But touching trees, put your hands against a big oak tree, and feel nature with your bare hands has some significant health benefits. So yeah, I'm in the forest at least once a day.
Listen, I'm from New Hampshire originally.
Oh, you're
And so
spoiled.
even though I wasn't in the woods, but we had woods behind us. And it's funny, now I live in LA, and you see all these things coming out about grounding or earthing, which is just like put your bare feet on the ground, take off the rubber and feel the earth. And I go to the beach right across the street from me, and I sit every morning with my feet in the sand, right? And it's just
And where in LA?
I'm in Marina Del Rey.
I lived in Marina Del Rey. I lived in the Marina City Club between 1998 and 2001.
Oh, nice. Well, then we technically were neighbors. Yeah, I'm right across from Mother's Beach.
I know exactly where that is, and I remember next to the Marina City Club there was is it a California Pizza Kitchen or?
Yeah, it's still there.
Probably is. Yeah.
Hilarious. Yeah. So but you don't realize until you don't have it or do have it, the impact fundamentally. After a long time of always having sneakers on in a city, you're like, wait, I don't feel connected, right? And then all of a sudden you do that once or twice, you're like, oh, that grounding, right? It's so important. So I think I want to talk a little bit about really kind of what you're working on, honestly. So it's really interesting. So you're launching a new company. So to your point, kind of round 2 or 3 or 4 or many more. And this one is called Masters of Trivia. So I just wanted to give you the floor on like why this, and kind of also why now do you think it's a good idea to relaunch this?
Yeah, I think the why now is even more interesting because it is the second iteration of a project that I had launched in the mid 2000s, between 2006 and 2008. So right before the advent of the first iPhone. For those BlackBerry users over there, you know what the interface looked like. So nobody actually was able to play any games on mobile. They were all web-based games in those years. We had developed a large ecosystem that was trivia and quiz based, that had attracted close to 1 million users within 18 months. And at that point in time, our Achilles heel was content production, because it cost an arm and a leg for writers in multiple languages to produce those quizzes by hand. So we kind of like broke even. Some months we were in the black, some months we were in the red, but it was a lot of work, and we kind of like shelved the idea. Already back then, I felt like it was my baby. I'm a huge trivia fan because it's reflective of who I am, how I grew up, being immersed into different languages, into different cultures, which a lot of people born and raised in the northeast of France, with the proximity of the German, the Swiss, the Italian, the Belgian, the Dutch borders, we all are to a certain extent. And then knowing, I think, at least it's not my phone. Yeah, that would be embarrassing.
Luckily, we have editing.
Yeah, so I was always fascinated by, as a marketer, by what could be done and what I consider to be, on the most granular level, the most flexible content unit. which is a question
Mm-hmm.
with an answer. So if you're a content marketer and you make a living as a content marketer, typically what you have to do is you have to produce a lot of content and excellent content for that content to be read and interacted with. So content first, and then assuming you can produce excellent content, assuming you can amass a large enough audience, can you pitch advertisers that may want to subsidize that effort? No matter how you slice it, it's a very difficult value proposition. And there's a tremendous amount of people and large funded, well-funded companies out there, back in the days, BuzzFeeds of the world, a lot less today, that basically could eat your lunch, right? Yes, you can still make a living as a blogger. Yes, you can obviously make a living as an influencer, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of a very, very minute fraction that make millions of dollars, and there are millions of them that make less than $1, right? So what we were looking at as a team is the ability to leverage this unit of content, which is a unit of knowledge. If you're assuming that you can ask a trivia question and there is an answer to it, a factual answer, right? If you ask when Lincoln was born, well, you can give 3 or 4 different options, but only one is going to be the right one because it's factual. There's no opinion in it whatsoever. That was one thing. And we wanted to create a platform in any language in the world where people could come, engage into a game, hence our tagline, knowledge gamified. So knowledge comes first, the game comes second, not the other way around. And be entertained and be able to play. If you're a Lakers fan, Los Angeles, you can play a Lakers quiz. If you're a hardcore Lakers fan, you can play, depending on the level, if you entry level to a very advanced one. And we're going to ask you a lot more difficult questions. If I ask, for example, most people on this podcast today, who is the mayor of Hamburg, it's not going to resonate with them. It's no interest, right? Hamburg, Germany. But if I ask somebody Hamburg, they better know the answer, who the mayor is, right? So you have all these facets to take into consideration. But the core value proposition is to democratize, using that term again, probably overusing it now, access to these units of knowledge that are neatly packaged up into quizzes that anyone from anywhere, using any device, using any type of speed of connection, doesn't have to be a gigabit connection, fiber connection. It could be a 3G mobile phone, ideally even a feature phone that still exists in some parts of the world, and come to this community, engage with the community, become part of the community, and regardless of who you are, where you are, what language you speak, you can acquire an education by playing a game about any topic that may be of interest to you. So the challenge today is quite different than it was back in 2006, 2007, 2008, is that how can we create this huge library of content fast enough on one side, and on the other side, how can we actually build a valuable business out of it? The solution, obviously, what brings both sides together, the supply and the demand side, very much like another ecosystem like an Uber and Airbnb. If you only have drivers and no riders, you have a problem. If you only have riders and no drivers, you have a problem. Same with hosts on Airbnb and people who want to stay there. So you always have to keep a balance between the supply and the demand. In our scenario, we need to have enough supply of content. Content comes first still, but the trivia content, the quiz content is much easier to create because it's factual. And it can be, to a large degree, automated today with some fact checking. So you can go to GPT-4 today and you can basically prompt it properly, train it on your project and say, okay, give me a 15-question multiple choice question and answer quiz on the Las Vegas Raiders in the 1980s. Focus on this, focus on that. Take an authoritative tone, take an entertaining tone, speak to me like a sports journalist, etc. Boom, here it is. Now you have a human curator to make sure that it's actually fact-checked, that everything is fine, make some adjustments, export that quiz directly into a game, which is the bridge that we're working on right now, that we hope to have resolved before Christmas. And then offer this game using tried, true, and proven digital marketing strategies to the largest number of people in the world. We have a crazy objective that I mentioned to you before this call. Within 5 years, we want to be able to offer our games to 1 billion people around the world. So we want to be the Candy Crush for knowledge, right? I'm not knocking Candy Crush. We used to have them as a client. But I think it would be nice that if people could actually interact with a casual game. When I say people from all walks of life, it could be a teenager, 12, 14 years old, to someone who is 95 years old with a tablet. My mom, at first she was afraid of the iPad, and now she's using it religiously. She doesn't, if there's something up with it and she needs an update, I'm the first person that she calls. There's something wrong with my iPad. At first, she didn't want to touch it. So, she is 84 now. She should be able to interact with it just as easily as someone who's very well versed in modern technology. So that's kind of like, from a legacy perspective, what we discussed earlier, what as an entrepreneur, as well as an investor, I would like to leave behind something that, if you pull out an old box, like a Scrabble box, wow, who's the guy who invented Scrabble? Do I see a Scrabble behind you somewhere there? Scrabble box? I think I see one.
No, I love that. And so, well, we have a couple of folks listening and watching. So if you have questions, please drop them in. I'm going to continue, but just wanted to call that out for folks. Sometimes they kind of listen in the background, but feel free to ask questions as well. So I want to dig into this. You said a lot of things, but there's just like this underpinning that I want to kind of just maybe I'm using a lot of uns right now, unearth, I guess, and talk about. So at the core of this, there's two ideas that bubble up to me. One is the idea of like mastery. So learning something enough that you become kind of a master in it, right? These kind of units of measure are micro, right? Micro learning is a huge space, and there's a whole bunch of learning development work that's been done around like how people learn, understand, and absorb information, and so on and so forth. So I'm hearing like there's this mastery conversation, and then there's this fundamental like how people learn or how people can learn new information or acquire information quickly. And I just wanted to pressure test, are those underpinnings of this idea, or is it really just like, this is really just for fun and like joy and like to make learning fun again? Because it was fun for me as a kid and I want to be fun again for people. And I feel like that's not happening, or something of that nature.
It's an excellent question. I think one of the core motivators, so the short answer is definitely some of these underpinnings, they do exist. So obviously when your parents get older, you're concerned about dementia. My mentor in my life was my maternal grandmother, who was a World War II resistant, had a lot of GIs living in our house during World War II, and ended up contracting Alzheimer's disease and dying of Alzheimer's. And that for me marked me, right? It still marks me today. Then there's this amazing Netflix documentary that looks at Alzheimer's patients that have become vegetables. They don't react to anything anymore. You put a headset onto them and you play the music from their childhood years or from their 20s, and they start dancing. It just awakens the brain instantly. So part of what we want to do is we want to segregate the user base and be able to offer learning games to the kids, developmental games to the adolescents, fun games for people who just want to be entertained. Yes, you should be able to play movie trivia. Why not, right? You should be able to quickly find a quiz on your favorite movie. You should be able to name that tune, Is it educational? Well, it's at the fringe, right? But it's mostly entertaining. And then also, and I think that's one thing that is a frustration that I've lived for many, many years, is that we tend to develop all the new products that we tend to ignore older people. When in fact, when you look at the demographic shift, it's the biggest opportunity of a lifetime. And when I say older people, myself included, now I'm older than I was yesterday, we don't want to necessarily get older. Where chronologically we can accept it. Yeah, we just check another year off, but I don't want my brain, I don't want to become old and decrepit, right? So how do I actually maintain the mental awareness, and what tool do I have that can keep me sharp on any topic, so I can actually have a conversation with a 20-year-old when I'm 80, right? And the 20-year-old is going to look at me, he's like, wow, grandpa's pretty sharp, right? It's pretty amazing. How does he know that? Well, maybe he's playing Masters of Trivia,
Yeah.
right? So we definitely want to take some of that into consideration. I've also had a number of conversations with psychologists, senior psychologists, etc. So I'm still a learning process, but I'm becoming more and more aware as to what kind of challenges that they face from a psychology perspective with an older population, and how maybe we can avert some of that by keeping the brain stimulated and entertained. And there's obviously a tremendous amount of data behind that. Train, just general hygiene, mental training exercises for senior citizens that if they play them even 5 to 10 minutes a day, they stay sharp pretty much for forever. Yep. And that's very much at the core of what we want to build as well.
Can we talk a little bit about the business model? Because you mentioned a couple things now, and just even reading the site, that are like interesting things to call out around the structure of how you want to operate. So you talked a bit about the access, right? Being able to access it no matter where you are. And we talked a little bit earlier about kind of this, what I think of ubiquitous Wi-Fi, right? Through all the different satellites in the air and all this sort of stuff, being able to have kind of this access, that seems like to be a core tenet. The unit of measure being micro, that's kind of a play on kind of maybe perhaps like user behavior and social content. And so like, is there like a three-legged stool model here that you're trying to like, that you're building around for the business? Or like, what do you think those core tenets kind of are?
Yeah, so obviously we have a pretty good idea as to what the business model will look like, because we had our first run at this model before. One thing I can tell you right now is that from an advertiser perspective, it's a dream come true. Why is it a dream come true? Because if you are an advertiser, regardless of what you're promoting or selling, whether product or service, whether it's a travel timeshare or a rivet for your car, you're looking for the most targeted user who may have an interest in what it is that you're selling. Basic psychology, right? Basic sales psychology. And where do they congregate, these people? How can I reach them? Hence, Google AdSense, Bing Ads, not Microsoft Ads, the ability to micro-target a user population on a keyword-specific basis. I think what we're building provides content and context, perfect content, perfect context that allows for a perfect match between the buy and the sell side. Meaning that if, let's just take one example, I can very quickly with my team create a quiz on any topic in any language under the sun and turn it live much faster from a content production perspective than any other content module, like a short or long form article, like a engaging YouTube video, which is going to take a lot longer and cost a lot more. And that quiz, or the question within the quiz, is much more targeted towards a user intent than anything else. So take an example. Let's say I want to sell streaming rights to a new TV show, Paramount Plus, Netflix, whoever may be streaming it. What better way to do so than to a person who has just played, who's a hardcore fan, who's just played a 15 or 20 question quiz about that TV series that I may have seen the first two iterations, the first season, and now the second season. Welcome to Wrexham, right? Perfect example. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, right? First season, amazing for the sports fans. You got Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, who buy a fledgling soccer club in Wales, 5th or 6th division, invest quite a bit of money and basically develop it, and the entire town comes alive, and amazing storytelling. And now season 2 just came out. Everybody was in anticipation of that. Now, I could construct a quiz about season 1. First of all, anybody who would be playing that quiz obviously has watched season 1, has a knowledge about it. And then, boom, here's your results. And now you have a link to purchase season 2. So that's what I mean by content and context, right? So back in the early 2000s, the rage was contextual advertising.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, how can you, as an advertiser, put your message in the perfect vicinity? The issue back then already was there was a burgeoning industry with UGC, user generated content, and how can you, as a brand, make sure that you're not going to be displayed alongside objectionable content?
Yeah.
It still, to a certain degree, exists today. Although there are filters, there's AI that can pretty much zap it out very, very quickly. But there's still a risk today, and it can do more harm than good for a brand. Mm. But in our scenario, what our objective is, from a business model perspective, is to have a perfect match between user interest and the advertiser looking to reach that user with that interest. And there is nothing better, nothing more targeted than a quiz to do that.
That's a really good, thank you for sharing. That's a very good insight. I think about, when I work with founders, I talk a lot about kind of, even at the MVP level, like having kind of a really specific value proposition that matches the customer, like just 1-to-1. Like you don't need to have 5-to-1. It needs to be like one thing that you can build a flywheel around that's super sticky, that's straightforward, that meets the need that they have and nothing beyond that, right? To kind of initiate.
Yeah, and not to mention the viral effect. Obviously, we're going to have 1-to-1 battles, multiplayer, right? So if I'm again going back to the example of the Welcome to Wrexham fan, hardcore fan, he just plays this. The first thing he's going to do is share this quiz with his 5 sporting buddies, 10 sporting buddies on WhatsApp or whatever he's using to share it, and they're going to play it again as well because he wants to see how they scored, right, on that game. So the viral effect and the ability to widen the circle of influence on that granular topic is bar none.
Right. It's like, and I think that's the thing that folks oftentimes are missing is like, you're tapping into human behavior, and what's the sticky human behavior that lets it be easily shareable? Because that's really how, word of mouth is still the basically number one way things get sold. And so understanding that sometimes I think it can be hard for folks who want to build really, really big, but they kind of want to skip the first step, which is like, where am I meeting the need that's super exciting for the buyer that makes them want to share, right? Like
it's not only the best method of marketing, it also has by far, hands down, the highest conversion ratio.
Yeah.
Right. If I tell Dominique right now, look, and we've known each other for 10, 15 years, oh my God, I just saw this movie, you have to watch it.
Yeah.
You're going to do it. If you tell me the same thing, it happens all the time. That's how I actually learned about Welcome to Wrexham. You got to watch the series. What is it about? Okay, give me a brief thing. I'm on it the same night, right? Because that the trust from that person who told me carries over to me. And that can be replicated in the content marketing space via a quiz that has such granularity to its interest level. But even though, if we were just looking at the way communities are being built online these days and how granular they are, if you're a fan of fly fishing, well, fly fishing is actually not even a micro market anymore. But fly fishing in northwestern Montana, you're still going to get 1.5 million people interested in that topic and joining that community, because that's where we can get the best rainbow trout, right? So that's actually what we're going to. And back in the days, we're going back 20 years, you were lucky to find a fly fishing community online. But now you can go drill down all the way to the nitty-gritty to find people that have the exact same interest, no matter how bizarre or how granular that topic is, and join that community for good or bad, right? But in our case, hopefully for the good, because obviously we're going to be separating the wheat from the chaff and making sure that we're producing quality content that can contribute to educating people while entertaining them.
I think you're spot on. I think that the day I realized that I had 2 moments of realization. The first was I was randomly looking at YouTube and I saw this whole category of people who like reenact like living in the 1800s and like making meals. And I was like, this is a thing. Like, this is a thing. And like, there's like millions of people who do this and watch this. And I was like, wow. And like the next week I'm like doing something else and I see this whole cadre of folks who are like into water bottles. And I'm like, these niches are like who's buying 5 water bottles, but people are, right? And so all of a sudden there's a lot.
And actually, going back to what we initially discussed, it's the democratization and the demonetization of anything media, in this particular case, social media, that made this happen.
Yeah.
Because if you go back 20 years, people didn't know. They thought, oh my God, I'm so weird. I like collecting whatever it is, bottle caps, right? And lo and behold, because now you can communicate, wow, there's a billion people like me, right? I had no idea. I'm not so special after all.
Which is important because it changes your mindset when you have, particularly I'm sure for younger people who feel like, oh, I don't know if I should do this or I'm nervous or whatever. It's like, no, everybody's doing it. Actually, there's a tribe for everything. And so this whole narrative of like you should or should not, or like there's this, there's this idea of what it looks like to do the right thing or the wrong thing or the good thing or the bad thing, kind of separate of kind of some other moral questions. But there's like, oh, there's actually a lot here that actually we can all participate in, because it's not just you. You're not alone in that thing. There's ton. I always laugh. I'm like, everyone is like, I'm living off grid. I'm like, there's probably 500,000 of you now in Alaska. You're just all neighbors living off grid. Like, you're not off grid anymore. There's probably
That's
all
right.
of you out there living in the same area together, because there's so many of you. I think what used to be, to your point, kind of the oddball is now like, oh, that's the norm. Actually,
Yeah, I'm mainstream. If I'm normal by 2000 standards, I'm probably the oddball now.
Yeah, literally. So we are at time. I have one question for you to close this out, because I thought it was so interesting, and I wanted to make sure we talk about it, particularly for folks who nowadays we see a lot of founders who social impact is a core part of their value proposition, whether that's with energy or climate, or kind of social issues, that they think of it as part of a core part of their business model and their structure. And they also want to make profits, but they also want to make impact at the same time, and they're not divergent. And you had something on your site that was really interesting called, you had our massive transformative purpose, MTP. So I'd never heard this term before. I wanted to know kind of when you heard it, and like, why did you apply this versus maybe like a theory of change or mission, vision, values, or something else like that?
So I can't take credit for it. You can look him up. His name is Peter Diamandis. He is the founder of the X Prize Foundation, as well as the Singularity University with Ray Kurzweil, who coined the term. It was immediately fascinating to me, and I probably read all of his books, as well as Ray Kurzweil's and the Best Friends, because it literally shook me in my core in terms of, what are we here for? What do we want to accomplish? How can we accomplish it? How do we leave a legacy? Kind of like literally encompassed everything that I had ever dreamed of as an entrepreneur, and that was representative of how I feel as a person in one term: MTP, massive transformative purpose. In other words, to sum it up, to define it, is like, what makes you get up in the morning? Like, if you didn't have to make a living, what would you do getting up in the morning? And how can you translate that? How can you leave a legacy, have an impact on as many people, ideally 1 billion plus in this world out of the 8, right? Percentage wise, it actually doesn't seem that far-fetched anymore now, right? How can I leave a positive impact on as many people as possible, ideally 1 billion plus, right? Whatever it is, what that is, right? Maybe you want to teach them music, and maybe you figure out how to build a platform to teach everybody to play an instrument. Maybe it is something where you can actually figure out how to eradicate people who can't sleep at night by singing them a lullaby, right? That goes viral, whatever that is. And one of his things that also is fascinating to me is that, and you hear this a lot, hence the term unicorn. By the way, my last name Einhorn means unicorn in German.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a big pun. When I go to German tech conferences, they ask me, when did I change my last name?
Right.
I was actually born with it. But one of the core tenets of Peter Diamandis' philosophy about the business and entrepreneurship is that if you want to become a billionaire, very simple formula: help 1 billion people or more, right? Because if you can truly help 1 billion people, if you look at anybody who has done this, any enterprise, any business has ever done that, they have multi-billion-dollar valuations. Don't worry about how you're going to make money. Don't worry about your business model. If you can actually accomplish that, you will become a de facto billionaire. There's no question about it. So yes, I mean, the duality between having, I guess, what we call net social impact and making money, because if you don't make any money, it's very, very difficult to have an impact, right? If you want to be part of an association, nonprofit organization, et cetera, a part of a charity, right? You got to be able to raise money. Without that, it's yes, you can donate your time, clearly, right? And that has an impact, but time is money as well. So there is a conversion rate there somewhere between the amount of time that you invest and the money you would have earned by doing something else. So at the end of the day, it is money.
Well, that was wonderful. I mean, I talked to you for hours, but thank you so much, Dom, for your time today on Accelerator Insider. For folks who guys are watching, you have questions as a follow-up, feel free to reach out to acceleratorinsider@gmail.com. We'll put all the notes and everything else in as we send out the updates. But wanted to say thank you again for watching Accelerator Insider, and we'll see you on the next one. So bye, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to just do 2 more questions and then we'll jump off here. So you said so many things that were like awesome. And I love this conversation because not every person that runs an accelerator incubator is also an entrepreneur and a founder. So, you end up with different insights depending on who you're talking to. And the entrepreneur is always the best because they have a different perspective about life, really. And the build process is like so core to their identity. Like it's part of their creative process. I always say everyone thinks things and like everyone's creative. They have a thought, they just move with their hands. It just depends on what that creative thing actually is for them. And so I wanted, to know for you in your journey, how do you think you see the world differently or what do you think people miss about future opportunities that maybe you think you see?
I think, the way I look at the world is as an eternal optimist. We all have huge ups and downs in our lives. One thing I learned very, very quickly is that if I focus on the downs, I never get up. I basically dig myself into a hole. So what's the point? I'm not here to make myself more miserable if I am miserable, right? It sounds so stupid, but at the same time, when you hear people complain about an issue and complain. So I have a little analogy. It's actually something I lived here in France about during COVID. Again, trash can, not the same trash can I mentioned during the call, but I empty my trash and I see these 2 gentlemen out there complaining about some trash that's laying on the floor and why can people throw the trash in the trash can, the littering and whatnot. But they went on and on and on, and I was getting closer and closer to the trash can, so I just picked it up and I threw it in there and I looked at both of them as problem solved, case closed, and I just walked away. And they were completely silent, didn't even know what to say. But that's kind of like a metaphor for how a lot of people lead their lives, right? And focusing on the negative rather than actually, okay, I can do something about that. I can solve this problem. In this case, it took 2 seconds to solve the problem. Sometimes it may take longer. Usually it takes longer, right? So I guess optimism is a key driver. And I think optimism offers you tremendous opportunities, if you keep your mind open and if you're actually willing to do something about certain issues, which is what an entrepreneur is here to do, right? We're not government employees, right? Nothing against government employees, we need them. But entrepreneurs, we're wired differently, right? We're the crazies of the world. And you do have to be crazy to do this for this long. I don't think I've ever worked less than 180 to 100 hours a week in my life.
Yeah.
But I wake up in the morning, I can't wait to get started.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm compelled to do that. If I were a pessimist, there is no chance. I would be depressed, laying in bed and turning around. Right. Yeah. I don't need an alarm clock. I wake up like clockwork, 4:45 in the morning. Right. Boom, I'm up, and I can't wait to get started. So I think it actually makes you a happier person, hence an optimist. And this vibration, this positive vibration, opens you up to opportunities, people, like-minded people, because alone we can only go so far, right? Yeah. We need to have like-minded people who share our values, our belief systems, our enthusiasm. Hopefully our enthusiasm is contagious upon them and theirs is contagious upon us. And as a group, as a community, we can move forward and we can solve problems.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to another entrepreneur the other day who said the same thing, optimism, and I'm like, I think it's our default way, our default mode of operating is just to wake up optimistic, and then like
It's
let the
different.
day
No,
take you where it takes you.
it's very difficult. Going back to Peter Diamandis, he always calls it CNN, the crisis news network, right? So obviously, bad news sells more advertising, unfortunately, than good news.
Yeah.
Like, I definitely think there's at least one opportunity for one news media that would only focus on the positive. Like, when's the last time we covered a teenager taking an old lady to help her cross the street?
Yeah.
But honestly, I'd like to watch that.
Yeah.
It makes me feel better about the world rather than seeing the opposite, like seeing an old lady get mugged, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are more people every day helping old people cross the street than mugging them.
Yep.
But we don't talk about it.
Yep.
That for me is a problem, and it's a problem ripe for disruption.
That's that 100%. I just saw there is a guy, a little Instagram dude who does like a good news show, and all he does is like random good, cool things that you just, the world's not so bad. And it's like, it actually, you do need that because you're doom scrolling, right? Everyone's doom
Look,
scrolling.
I mean, if you look at the data, it just like homicide rates around the world. I mean, go back 200 years, go back 50 years, go back 20 years. It's been declining ever since, right? If you look at any of the sort, any data, GDP growth, right? Yes, you had some blips, World War I, World War II, right? The crash, the dot-com crash in 2000, 2008 market crash, but it keeps going up. Our standard of living has increased regardless of what happened.
Right.
That's why
life people are living longer, like everything is kind of on an up, and
100%.
kind of hear this all in a negative. And so, yeah, no, you're spot on in being able to manage your mind around that, right? The skill of that, and the focus and the responsibility of that. I think we consume so much, we kind of stop asking, wait, what are we consuming? The responsibility of us to manage against that, right? I think is something that
past results are never indicative of future results, right? That's a given. That's the disclaimer that everybody in the financial industry has kind of like taught us. At the same time, data indicates that that's what we're trending towards, regardless of how we look at life, right? Yes, there could be blips on the screen. Yes, there could be failures, right? But overall, if we stick with it and we stick it out, we win. We don't lose.
The story doesn't articulate the truth of human nature, which is evolution at all costs for survival, right? And that default will move you forward. Otherwise, so I think I talk a lot of startups, and we talk a lot about like when you're asking people about their behavior, you look at past behavior and present to determine the future. And I'm like, with the caveat of like human evolution, like with the caveat of like, you have the right to change at any point in time in your life, right? There might be a trend, but there also there is another trend that competes with that directly, which is that people can change. Right?
Yeah, they always say yes. You can proactively decide. I mean, it goes back to free will, right? Yes, and my dad had a funny thing when we were younger. It's very funny. He's a funny old man now. He always used to say, "Oh, I'd love to commit suicide today, but I have way too much stuff to do." Right? You can't actually proactively decide to jump off a bridge.
Right.
But most of us don't do it.
Right.
Exactly. So
that's hilarious.
It's all about perspective.
So last question, then we'll close it out. So thank you for your time. I know we're a little bit over. I just wanted to name this because you have a lot of interest. So your history between art, digital media, you also own a semi-professional rugby team. But what's the red thread of the whole thing, the narrative of your life? What do you think the red thread is?
I think challenges and overcoming them, identifying problems and finding solutions. I don't think that problems would exist if solutions didn't exist somewhere, maybe even hidden deep in our subconscious mind.
Did you know that about yourself always, or when did you find out that you knew yourself?
No, I definitely didn't, because the way I was brought up is very much regimented and in a box. But very early on in my life, growing up in France, I read Jules Verne, what Americans call Jules Verne. And in those books, everything was possible. And most of what he described, like the travel to the moon, the submarine with Captain Nemo, etc., all came through. And I found that absolutely fascinating. I read every single book that he ever wrote as a young teenager, even preteen. And that kind of like shaped my vision of life, saying that everything is possible. You know, whatever people are telling you is not possible, it's exactly the opposite. So I became a rebel in that sense. And a recluse for many, many years in my youth, where would just be devouring books, because that was my filter against negative noise.
That's wonderful. That's super, super helpful. I always tell people, get offline, read a book. It helps. It helps.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
It doesn't mean if you read a book, it doesn't mean you're depressed.
Right.
It mean quite the opposite.
Right. The missed signals.
Exactly.
It's still worth it.
Oh, you're so antisocial. Yeah, because most of the social life right now is all about negativity. I want nothing to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, people laugh at me because they'll say, I'll have my headphones in for something and say, what are you listening to? I'm like, free, like 38,
You're a
50 hertz
psychologist.
frequency, or like something like, something like, I'm looking at the plant sounds, like just calm, just because the energy, to your point, if you don't really manage it, you can really see how it shifts your mood, your identity, even with the food, all that. So like, it's a lot of work right now, a little bit in a different way to be a human. A lot of things are more convenient, but a lot of things also are harder. We have to be more aware. And that's a different mental shift for areas of our life that we didn't, maybe in the past, that we had to really have awareness of, right? It's a shifting of awareness, right? That can cause stress, right? So to your point of reducing the noise, creates the clarity, right? So, this is wonderful. So thank you so much, Dom, again. I'm going to end the stream. This is actually going to go in when we do the